The protagonist of today's story is Victor Lustig, often described as the greatest con artist of the 20th century. He engineered dizzying schemes, sold devices that supposedly duplicated $100 bills, flooded America with counterfeit currency, and even managed to win the trust of Al Capone himself. Yet, he didn't make history as a counterfeiter, but as the man who sold the Eiffel Tower twice. Not every con brought him fortune, but that rarely bothered him. Sometimes he did it not for money, but simply for the art of the game. He changed identities and appearances as easily as gloves. Historians have uncovered 49 aliases linked to him, and Victor Lustig was only one of them. His real name is believed to have been Robert Miller, but since that claim comes from the man himself, trusting it completely would be unwise. History remembers him as Victor Lustig, and that's the name we'll use from here on. He wove such a dense web of lies that even today, his true identity remains shrouded in mystery. He claimed to descend from an ancient line of European nobility, which earned him the nickname the Count. Yet recently uncovered documents reveal that his beginnings were far more modest. He was born in 1890 into a bourgeois Czech family. His father served as the mayor of Hostine, a small town about 100 kilometers from Prague. After finishing school, Victor enrolled at Charles University in Prague, where he got into a duel that left a noticeable scar across his face. His father decided it was no longer safe for him to stay in the city and sent him to study at the Sorbonne in Paris. Most likely, the injury came from what was known as academic fencing, a ritualized duel where opponents stand still and strike only with flat-tipped blades. The goal wasn't victory, but to mark your rival's face, a scar that proudly proclaimed you a man of honor. Lustig spent most of his time not on studying, but perfecting his craft, and in that field, he was astonishingly successful. He lived by a personal code, a system of behavior that all but guaranteed his success. Over the years, his remarks and advice were compiled into what became known as his 10 Commandments of the Con Man. Be a patient listener. It's patience, not pushiness, that brings luck to a con artist. Never look bored. Wait until the other person shares their political views, then agree with them. Let them express their religious beliefs and mirror them. Hint at a sexual topic, but don't pursue it unless the other person shows strong interest. Never talk about illnesses unless the other person seems fascinated by the subject. Never pry into someone's personal affairs. They'll tell you everything themselves eventually. Never boast. Simply let your importance be quietly obvious. Never be untidy. Never get drunk. Lustig spoke several languages fluently, and when he decided to see the world, he figured there was no better place to make money than aboard ocean liners packed with wealthy travelers. He mastered every card trick in existence, palming, second dealing, bottom dealing, until, as one friend later put it, he could make a deck of cards do everything but talk. He started with small-time hustles, working as a card sharp and selling fake lottery tickets on transatlantic voyages. But when World War I broke out, that business dried up, the wealthy clientele vanished, and with them, his easy targets. Lustig decided it was time to try his luck in the United States. The atmosphere in America at that time was perfect for a man of his talents, a land of ambition, opportunity, and greed. And it was there, after reading a curious newspaper article, that Victor Lustig conceived the greatest con of his life, selling the Eiffel Tower. With the help of his partner, Dan Collins, Lustig forged a set of convincing documents that transformed him, on paper, into the deputy director of the French Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs. He checked into one of Paris's finest hotels and sent invitations to 5 of the city's leading scrap metal dealers. When they arrived, he greeted them as a government official and began with a tone of utmost seriousness. Absolute confidentiality was required, he said. Nothing must reach the press. The matter at hand concerned the Eiffel Tower. In 1925, the Eiffel Tower was still the tallest structure in the world. Originally built for the 1889 World's Fair, it had been intended as a temporary installation to be dismantled after 20 years. Over time, however, it had become part of the Paris skyline, repurposed for radio and telegraph transmissions. But debates about its future resurfaced every few years. "Gentlemen," said the well-dressed man with aristocratic manners and a scar on his left cheek, "I'm sure you've all read the papers. The Eiffel Tower, one of the grandest landmarks of our beloved city, is now in a state of disrepair. Some of the men nodded. Indeed, they remembered seeing such reports. The official explained that maintaining and repairing the tower had become too costly for the government. Reluctantly, he said, the authorities had decided to dismantle it and sell the 7,000 tons of iron as scrap. He invited the businessmen to submit bids for the contract, but emphasized strict secrecy. The government feared public outrage if word got out too soon about the tower's demolition. What Lustig really wanted was to study their reactions, to spot the perfect mark. He found it in André Poisson, an ambitious but inexperienced scrap dealer from the provinces, eager to prove himself in Paris. Poisson dreamed of being known as the man who bought the Eiffel Tower, and Lustig knew exactly how to exploit that dream. The next day, he invited Poisson back for a private meeting. "Monsieur," Lustig told him with a smile, "congratulations. Your offer was the most favorable. The government is prepared, in principle, to proceed with you." That phrase, "in principle," was the bait. It hinted that a discreet gift might smooth the process. Poisson, thinking this was how things were done in the capital, slipped him a generous bribe, along with the first payment for the tower itself. In return, he received a folder of official-looking papers, stamped and sealed to perfection. Of course, every one of them was fake. The total take amounted to about 70,000 francs, roughly $1 million in today's money. A few days later, Victor Lustig, veteran swindler, was relaxing in Austria, spending Poisson's money in peace. He had once again proven his genius for reading people. Long before psychologists like Daniel Kahneman formalized theories of cognitive bias, Lustig was already exploiting them with surgical precision. André Poisson, in particular, fell victim to what we now call stereotyping and confirmation bias. Lustig's request for a bribe fit perfectly with Poisson's own assumptions about corrupt government officials, reinforcing his trust in the con. Hiding out in Vienna, Lustig scoured the newspapers, expecting to see headlines about the man who sold the Eiffel Tower. But not a single word appeared. Poisson, too ashamed to admit how he'd been duped, chose to keep the scandal to himself. While waiting for news from Paris, Lustig didn't waste his time. In Vienna, he carried out yet another con, simple in design but brilliantly executed. A wealthy aristocrat walked into a jeweler's shop, admired a magnificent pearl, and bought it without hesitation. Then, with a refined air, he mentioned that he absolutely had to find its twin, another pearl to complete the pair. He was willing to pay any price. Eager to please such a lucrative client, the jeweler began searching everywhere and finally found a perfect match at a small pawn shop. The second pearl was nearly identical to the first, though twice as expensive. The jeweler, expecting a handsome profit from the aristocrat's return, bought it immediately. But the nobleman never came back, and the pawn shop vanished soon after. Only then did the jeweler realize the truth. He had just bought back his own pearl, losing the full price in the process. By then, Lustig had confirmed what he suspected. Poisson hadn't gone to the police. So he waited a few months and returned to Paris to run the exact same scam again. This time, however, his new mark did contact the authorities. Lustig narrowly escaped arrest and fled across the Atlantic, back to the United States, where he already had connections waiting. America in the 1920s was the perfect playground for a man like Victor Lustig. The economy was booming, the stock market was soaring, and newspapers overflowed with stories of people getting rich overnight. In a world obsessed with easy money, Lustig decided to sell the ultimate fantasy, a machine that could duplicate banknotes. To his eager customers, he explained that the wooden box contained an intricate chemical and mechanical process. Place a $100 bill inside, he would say, and in 6 hours, the machine will produce an identical copy, so perfect it's indistinguishable from the real thing. He would demonstrate it himself, secretly preloading a second bill in a hidden compartment. Awestruck buyers would hand over small fortunes for the miraculous invention, only to discover that after a few successful uses, the machine mysteriously stopped working. By then, Lustig was long gone. Some victims paid as much as $46,000 for a single box, convinced they could quickly make their money back. Needless to say, they never did. Lustig sold plenty of these boxes, one of them to the sheriff of Remsen County, Oklahoma. When the sheriff realized he'd been conned, he tracked Lustig down and was ready to arrest him. But the smooth-talking con man managed to convince the officer that the device must have been defective. To make amends, Lustig offered to refund him, handing over a bundle of real cash. The sheriff accepted. Hours later, he was arrested himself, caught trying to spend those very same counterfeit bills. Furious, he described the count to federal agents, but not even that spared him a jail sentence. The Roaring Twenties were a golden age for organized crime. With prohibition banning the sale and production of alcohol, bootlegging became a national pastime, and mob families grew rich beyond imagination. Lustig slipped easily into that world, mingling with gangsters and swindlers alike. And somehow he even managed to win the confidence of Chicago's most notorious crime boss, Al Capone. Two men with scars met face to face, and Lustig persuaded Capone to invest $50,000 in what he called an extraordinary business opportunity. 2 months later, Lustig returned to Capone, looking crestfallen. He explained that the deal had collapsed, that he had personally lost money, but he had fought to protect Capone's share. Then, with great sincerity, he returned the full $50,000. Capone, unaware that there had never been any real investment and that his money had simply been sitting untouched in a safe for 2 months, was deeply impressed by the honest little man. In a rare gesture of respect, he rewarded Lustig with $5,000 as compensation for his supposed losses. It was a masterstroke of psychological manipulation. Capone had fallen victim to what we now call the contrast effect. In a world of gangsters and double-crossers, a man who returned every penny seemed almost saintly. Compared to everyone else in Capone's orbit, Lustig looked like the most trustworthy person alive, and the mob boss saw no reason to question his integrity. At some point, counterfeiting became Lustig's main line of business. His operation grew so large and sophisticated that it began to threaten the very trust in the American financial system. By the late 1920s, the roaring boom had given way to the worst economic collapse in modern history. The Great Depression began in 1929 with the stock market crash, and soon factories closed, banks failed, and millions lost their jobs and savings. Amid this chaos, Victor Lustig launched the biggest con of his life. Together with William Watts, a skilled forger who had once produced labels for bootleg liquor, and a talented chemist named Tom Shaw, Lustig set up a secret printing operation. It was a full-scale underground factory producing counterfeit dollars of astonishing quality, so precise that even experienced bank tellers often couldn't tell them from the real thing. To distribute the fake cash, Lustig built a network of couriers who never realized they were part of a criminal ring. The flood of counterfeits pouring into an already weakened economy soon alarmed the U.S. Secret Service. It took them months to trace the source of the fake bills, and even longer to catch the elusive Count. Lustig changed names, passports, and faces as easily as most men changed hats. For the Secret Service, the pursuit turned into a game of cat and mouse. Lustig traveled with a suitcase full of disguises. He could become a rabbi, a priest, a hotel porter, or a bellhop at a moment's notice. Dressed as a porter, he could slip out of any hotel under pursuit, sometimes even taking the guests' luggage with him. But the net was slowly closing in. In the end, it wasn't the police or the Secret Service that brought him down. It was a woman. In the spring of 1935, agents received an anonymous phone call from a woman's voice. She gave them an address in New York City where Lustig was said to be a frequent visitor. Surveillance was set up immediately, and within days, they had him. On May 10, 1935, at a street corner in New York, Victor Lustig felt a firm tug on the velvet collar of his Chesterfield coat. A voice barked, "Hands up!" The great conman's run was finally over. The arresting agent, Frank Seckler of the U.S. Secret Service, later told the Pittsburgh Press in a 1951 interview that Lustig had been betrayed by his lover, a brothel owner named Billy Schibel, who suspected him of cheating on her. During the arrest, agents found a small lead key in Lustig's wallet. Investigation revealed it belonged to a subway station locker in New York City. When the locker was opened, agents discovered over $51,000 in counterfeit bills and the engraved plates used to print them. The evidence was overwhelming. The Secret Service had finally cornered the world's most brilliant con artist. It seemed the story of Victor Lustig had reached its end. While awaiting trial, scheduled for September 2, 1935, Victor Lustig sat in a cell of New York's federal prison, grimly nicknamed the Tombs. At the time, it was considered escape-proof. Yet that very day, when guards arrived at his third-floor cell, they found it empty. The Count had vanished in broad daylight. On his pillow lay a handwritten note, a passage from Victor Hugo's Les Miserables. He allowed himself to be led in a promise. Jean Valjean had his promise. Even to a convict, especially to a convict, it may give the convict confidence and guide him on the right path. Law was not made by God, and man can be wrong. Later, it became clear what had happened. The day before his trial, Lustig had tied together a rope from bedsheets, climbed out the window, and slowly descended the wall, posing as a window washer. As he made his way down, he calmly wiped the windows of other prisoners' cells, keeping up the act. No one stopped him. Some may have assumed he was simply doing his job. Others fell prey to what psychologists John Darley and Bib Latane would later call the bystander effect, when everyone expects someone else to intervene. Either way, Lustig walked free once again. In their pursuit, investigators discovered a counterfeit printing workshop in Pittsburgh and arrested his associate, William Watts. Lustig himself remained on the run until Saturday evening, September 28, 1935. In Pittsburgh, agents from the FBI and Secret Service were watching a car on the city's north side when Lustig appeared and climbed into it. The agents gave chase. For 9 city blocks, the two cars raced through the streets, engines roaring. When Lustig's driver refused to stop, the agents rammed his vehicle, sparks flying as the tires locked. The cars screeched to a halt, doors burst open, and the agents aimed their guns. Lustig looked at them, smiled, and said, "Well, boys, here I am." His trial finally began in December 1935. At first, Lustig denied everything, but once it became clear the evidence was overwhelming, he confessed. He was charged with 6 counts of counterfeiting, though the sentences were merged. Had they been cumulative, he would have faced 60 years. Instead, he received 15 years for counterfeiting and 5 for his escape. The Count was sent to Alcatraz, the notorious island prison in San Francisco Bay. By coincidence, one of his fellow inmates was his old business partner, Al Capone. Lustig would spend 12 years there. Prison life did not treat him kindly. The cold, damp air took its toll on inmate number 300. By December 7, 1946, he had filed an astonishing 1,192 medical requests. Guards believed he was faking illness, part of yet another escape plan, and even found torn bedsheets in his cell, proof, they thought, of a new attempt. Reports described him as prone to exaggerating physical ailments and frequently complaining of both real and imaginary conditions. Eventually, Lustig was transferred to the Federal Medical Center in Springfield, Missouri, where doctors realized he hadn't been faking at all. He died there from complications of pneumonia. Decades later, in March 2015, a historian named Tomasz Andel from Lustig's supposed hometown began searching for traces of his most infamous resident. He combed through school rosters, election rolls, and records rescued from Nazi book burnings. He must have gone to school in Hostine, Andel reasoned, but his name doesn't appear anywhere, not even in the list of elementary students. After years of searching, Andel reached a startling conclusion. There is no concrete proof that Victor Lustig was ever born. We may never know who the real Count Victor Lustig was, but we do know this. The world's most colorful con artist died at 8:30 p.m. on March 11, 1947. On his death certificate, under occupation, one simple word was written: salesman.